It was a warm summer night in July 1997, in a quiet neighborhood in Whittier, California, the kind of place where violence never happens. On a deserted street in the middle of the night, gunshots pierced the silence. When police arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Bruce Cleland, a respected software engineer, lying in a pool of blood. It quickly became clear that this was no random act of violence. It was something more planned, deliberate, and sinister. Bruce Cleland was born on March 31, 1954, in South Pasadena, California. He grew up in an affluent neighborhood with his older sister, surrounded by comfort and opportunity. Both of his parents were highly educated, financially secure, with strong signs of family wealth from earlier generations. From the outside, the Clelands looked like the perfect family: accomplished parents, well-raised children, and a bright future. Bruce was exceptionally intelligent from a young age. However, as a teenager, he discovered that his intelligence couldn't shield him from being treated cruelly. In 1968, he began attending South Pasadena High School, where his appearance and mannerisms made him a target for bullying. He was often teased and mockingly nicknamed Tiny Tim, after the entertainer known for his unusual voice and eccentric personality. For Bruce, the nickname cut deeper than just a jab at his slight build and soft-spoken voice. It symbolized how others saw him: gentle, awkward, and easy to dismiss. Yet instead of lashing out, Bruce endured the teasing with quiet resilience. He rarely showed anger and often coped by laughing at himself. His shy, reserved nature left him vulnerable. Throughout high school, he never dated, and his classmates thought he was weak. Still, he formed a small circle of close friends who appreciated his intelligence, kind personality. At home, his father, Harold Cleland, was his greatest supporter. The two shared a special bond, attending air shows and football games together, moments that gave Bruce a sense of belonging and strength. Romance intrigued him, but his lack of confidence kept him from pursuing relationships. Believing rejection was inevitable, he focused on academics instead. Science and technology became his refuge. Physics, mathematics, and computers fascinated him. His dedication paid off. By the time he graduated in June 1972, Bruce ranked among the top students in his class. He went on to attend Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California, one of the country's most prestigious science and engineering schools. There, he experimented with social life, parties, beer, new friendships, but never let distractions interfere with his studies. In June 1976, he graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree and soon entered Stanford University, where he earned his master's degree in 1978. With his education complete, Bruce launched a successful career. He first worked at General Electric in San Jose, California, before later joining TRW as a software engineer. His projects were highly technical and sometimes involved classified contracts with the United States military. In 1987, Bruce transferred within the company and relocated to Redondo Beach. By then, he was earning over $100,000 a year, a remarkable salary at the time. Yet despite his income, Bruce lived simply. He drove modest cars, avoided luxury, and invested carefully in savings and stocks. For him, practicality always outweighed status, and by the late 1982, he had quietly built substantial personal wealth. Colleagues admired Bruce for his discipline and frugality. Every decision he made, whether financial or personal, reflected a thoughtful, methodical character. By the 1992, he was in his 40s, financially secure, and respected in his field. The shy teenager once mocked in high school, had grown into a man with stability and confidence. Yet in matters of the heart, Bruce still seemed paralyzed. Years of solitude and inexperience left him uncertain and hesitant when it came to love. All of that changed in late 1995. That year, Bruce met a woman who would alter the course of his life, Rebecca. Their paths crossed at a local swap meet where Rebecca was selling spices. For Bruce, who had never been much of a dater, the encounter was electric. Captivated by her beauty and charm, he clumsily tried to impress her, even offering the idea of a job at an IT company. Rebecca Umerhim handed him her resume. Soon afterward, Bruce called her. A relationship began. From the start, Rebecca's intentions appeared unusually direct. Within a week of meeting, she suggested marriage. For Bruce, who had never experienced such attention from a woman, the proposal was overwhelming yet deeply flattering. Eager for love, he agreed. Stepping blindly into his first serious relationship, Rebecca wasted no time. She introduced him to her 5-year-old son, claiming she had no contact with the boy's father and did not even know his identity. Almost immediately, she leaned on Bruce for financial support. Complaining about her living situation, she accepted his offer to rent her an apartment. Bruce furnished it, covered expenses, and even bought her a car. At first, it was a used Honda, but soon he upgraded it to a new Toyota after her persuasion. Over time, the requests grew bolder. Cosmetic surgery, jewelry, even a boat. For Bruce, who had spent years carefully saving, generosity felt like love. For Rebecca, it became a test of how much she could extract. Rebecca insisted on waiting until marriage for physical intimacy, something he interpreted as a sign of morality and self-respect. She claimed she had only ever been with one man, the father of her child. To Bruce, this made her unique, someone worth protecting and sacrificing for. When it came time to choose an engagement ring, Rebecca selected an extravagant diamond worth $10,000. Despite his normally cautious nature with money, Bruce eagerly paid. Soon after, she set her sights on a 4-bedroom house near Los Angeles, priced at $350,000, an enormous commitment for the mid-negative 1,990 seconds. Bruce purchased it, believing it was a gesture of love and security. They had a wedding in October 1996, but Rebecca wanted more. She envisioned a lavish church ceremony in January 1997, one she felt would showcase her true worth. Until then, she suggested that she and her son move into the new house, while Bruce wait until the church wedding before joining them. To Bruce, this seemed like a sign of tradition and respect. In reality, Rebecca had already discovered his greatest weakness, his innocence. She knew he was inexperienced with women, defenseless against manipulation, and utterly flattered by her attention. What Bruce saw as love, Rebecca quickly turned into leverage. But who was Rebecca, really? Her story had begun long before she ever met Bruce. Her mother, Lucy, grew up in Mexico, where she endured abuse that led to an early pregnancy. Pressured by her family to marry her abuser to avoid shame, Lucy entered a doomed marriage plagued by instability and poverty. Seeking escape, the family eventually immigrated to the United States, hoping for a better life. On August 15, 1969, Rebecca Salcedo was born in California, the third daughter in a family already marked by hardship. Her father abandoned the household when she was still a child, leaving her mother, Lucy, to shoulder the burden of raising 3 daughters alone. Years later, the family discovered that he had died, but by then, Lucy had long been forced into the dual role of provider and caregiver. Life in California was expensive, and though the extended family sometimes helped, money was always scarce. Eventually, Lucy remarried. Her new husband, Pedro Salcedo, accepted the girls as his own and tried to bring stability to the home. Still, Pedro was not wealthy, and the family's lifestyle remained modest, with every dollar carefully stretched just to cover essentials. Even with Pedro's support, Lucy's mental health began to unravel. Withdrawn and overwhelmed, she increasingly retreated from daily responsibilities. This left her daughters with little structure or guidance. Instead of a cohesive, supportive household, tension became the norm. The sisters quarreled constantly, competing against one another rather than working together. In this chaotic atmosphere, Rebecca quickly realized she could live without real authority over her. She came and went as she pleased, shaping her own rules. As Rebecca entered her teenage years, she embraced a lifestyle centered on attention, popularity, and freedom. Schoolwork became secondary. She preferred parties, shopping trips, and the thrill of being noticed. With natural charm and striking looks, she quickly learned that she could bend situations to her advantage. Boys offered her rides, gifts, and money, benefits she rarely turned down. By age 16, she took her independence to another level. She agreed to marry a man who desperately needed a green card. As a U.S. citizen, she could provide it, and in return, she received $2 million. This marriage of convenience marked a turning point. It was the first in a long series of calculated decisions where relationships became a means of survival, opportunity, and profit. The early 1992s introduced even greater turmoil. In 1991, Rebecca was arrested on charges of possession of illegal substances with intent to sell. The conviction resulted in a 3-year prison sentence. Around the same time, she discovered she was pregnant. When asked about the father, she admitted she had no idea who he was. On October 22, 1991, while still behind bars, she gave birth to a son. Her family cared for the child during her incarceration. Though sentenced to 3 years, she was released after roughly a year and a half for good behavior. This dark chapter would later be completely hidden from Bruce Cleland, who never suspected the reality of her past. Upon leaving prison, Rebecca faced the daunting challenge of rebuilding her life. No job, no degree, and the responsibility of a young child, but she soon entered a relationship that offered emotional refuge. Her partner was Sherry, a former police officer. To those who knew Rebecca at the time, Sherry seemed to be her true love. Rebecca even had Sherry's name tattooed on her leg as a permanent sign of commitment. For several years, from 1991 to 1994, Rebecca, Sherry, and her son built a life together. It was perhaps the most stable and genuinely happy period Rebecca ever experienced. That sense of stability was abruptly shattered in 1994. Lucy, long plagued by mental illness, took her own life. The tragedy devastated Rebecca. Friends and family noticed a dramatic change in her behavior. Once relatively steady, she became volatile, argumentative, and unpredictable. Her relationship with Sherry began to crumble under constant fights, infidelity, and Rebecca's return to partying. By the end of the year, the bond was broken. Rebecca once again found herself untethered, drifting from one social circle to another, seeking someone new to provide the security and attention she craved. It was in this vulnerable and unstable period that Rebecca crossed paths with Bruce Cleland. To her, Bruce represented something she had been seeking for years, a man who was gentle, trusting, and financially secure. She immediately recognized his naivety in matters of love and knew how to craft a persona that would appeal to him. She presented herself as principled, loyal, and morally upright. To Rebecca, Bruce was the perfect target. Wealthy, inexperienced, and eager to please. Bruce, captivated by love, completely trusted Rebecca. He bought a house, looking forward to them living together. But the house quickly became a busy center of activity. Rebecca invited friends over frequently, hosted parties, and entertained men whom she introduced as cousins. Bruce never questioned her explanations. His deep trust, combined with his lack of relationship experience, left him unable to see what was happening right in front of him. In January 1997, their lavish church wedding finally took place, a ceremony designed to match Rebecca's ambitions and to project an image of perfection. To the outside world, they seemed like a success story. Bruce, the accomplished, intelligent professional, and Rebecca, the devoted young wife. But appearances were deceiving. At her bachelorette party, just days before the ceremony, Rebecca confided to friends that she didn't love Bruce at all. Her marriage, she admitted, was about one thing only: money. Bruce and Rebecca traveled to Hawaii for their honeymoon, but the trip only highlighted how fragile their union truly was. Even then, Rebecca could not hide her disdain. She called friends and ridiculed her new husband, describing her intimate life with him in cruel detail, saying it was the most humiliating experience of her life. Many hoped marriage might soften Rebecca, that with time she would grow into the role of a loyal partner, especially with a man as devoted as Bruce. He continued to shower her with kindness, patience, and loyalty, but Rebecca never even pretended to reciprocate. Once back from Hawaii, the thin facade of marriage crumbled entirely. Rebecca returned to late nights, wild parties, and lavish spending, burning through Bruce's money as though it were endless. Her infidelity was no secret. She saw other men openly, and while friends noticed, Bruce seemed unwilling, or unable, to confront the truth. Instead, he retreated into his work, spending less time at home and leaving Rebecca free to indulge in her desires. Within just 4 months of their wedding, the situation was irreparably broken. Rebecca began talking openly about divorce, boasting to her friends about the large settlement she expected to secure. What she failed to understand, however, was California's clear legal boundary. The fortune Bruce had carefully built before their marriage would remain his. Still, Rebecca pressed forward, determined to turn the marriage into profit. The first public cracks appeared in April when police were called to their home after a heated, loud argument spilled out of control. For Bruce, the tension and stress became unbearable. Naturally calm and soft-spoken, he was not a man prone to anger, but being forced out of his own home was a breaking point. He left the house and sought legal advice, slowly beginning to recognize what he had long denied. Rebecca's affections were never real. She was motivated purely by money. The division of assets after their split was not what she expected. Rebecca's dreams went up in smoke. Because Bruce had purchased his home and accumulated wealth before marriage, those assets were legally protected. The only amount subject to division totaled around $5,000, a devastating blow to her expectations. To Rebecca, it felt like an insult, yet she wasn't ready to let go. Even after their separation, she continued using Bruce's credit cards without permission. Designer clothing, glittering jewelry, nights at upscale restaurants, beauty treatments, and party expenses all found their way onto his statements. From the outside, Rebecca maintained the image of glamour and abundance. In reality, it was Bruce's steady paycheck that still fueled her lifestyle. Meanwhile, Bruce moved back into his parents' home. His attorney advised him to sever ties completely, to cut Rebecca off for good. But Bruce, hopeful to a fault, clung to the possibility that their marriage might be salvaged. Rebecca, ever calculating, sensed his weakness and dangled the idea of reconciliation. On the morning of Friday, July 25, 1997, she called him with a suggestion. Perhaps they could start over. To Bruce, it was the one thing he had longed to hear. That evening, they arranged to meet at the same restaurant where they had first gone on a date. Bruce picked her up, and by 9:30 p.m., they were seated together, sharing dinner. An hour later, they were back on the road. At Rebecca's urging, they stopped by her uncle's house, a man she often described as a father figure. The visit seemed ordinary, calm even. Around 1 o'clock a.m., they said their goodbyes and drove off. Rebecca was behind the wheel when their car pulled onto a quiet, isolated stretch of road. She suddenly claimed she needed to step out and check the tailgate. Bruce, sitting in the passenger seat, waited. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. The stillness of the night shattered as gunshots rang out. Bruce was struck and scrambled out of the car, attempting to flee, but another shot tore into his back. He collapsed to the ground, helpless, as the killer closed in and delivered a final shot to his head. From the window of a nearby house, a woman named Virginia Selva caught a glimpse of the horror unfolding outside. Horrified, she immediately dialed 911. When police arrived, they found Bruce lying lifeless, only feet from his car. Rebecca was seated near the hood, claiming she had been struck in the head and knocked unconscious, but detectives noticed something strange from the very start. Rebecca showed no panic, no tears, no shock. Instead, she calmly offered an explanation. It must have been a robbery. She even insisted that her diamond wedding ring had been stolen, yet investigators quickly noticed the inconsistencies. Her purse and cell phone remained untouched inside the car. Bruce's wallet, with cash inside, was still in his pocket. A medical examination showed she had no head injuries. When Rebecca sat down with investigators, her statements immediately struck detectives as odd. Rather than focusing on her husband's violent death, she spoke at length about her outfit that evening, their first date years earlier, and the restaurant they had just visited. None of it addressed the brutality of what had happened on that road. Detectives grew increasingly skeptical. A closer look at her background and at the short marriage itself quickly revealed troubling signs. Friends and acquaintances described a woman obsessed with material wealth, prone to extravagant spending, unfaithful to her husband, and openly dissatisfied with the marriage from the very beginning. Then came the discovery that shattered any lingering doubts. Just 1 month before Bruce's murder, Rebecca had quietly taken out multiple life insurance policies in his name, totaling roughly $1 million. On the documents, Bruce's signature had been crudely forged. If he were to die, Rebecca stood to inherit everything: his house, his possessions, and the insurance payout. Investigators also learned that Bruce was a man without enemies. No grudges, no disputes, no history of violence, but witnesses near the crime scene recalled something else. They had seen a young Latino male in the area that night. Detectives turned to Rebecca's phone records. One name stood out immediately: Alvaro Quesada, her cousin. He matched the witness description. The evidence trail closed in quickly. Under interrogation, Alvaro confessed to being the gunman. He admitted he had ambushed Bruce at Rebecca's request. His brother, José Quesada, also confessed to participating in the crime. Both men independently pointed to Rebecca as the orchestrator, the mastermind, who had manipulated them into carrying out the killing. The case proceeded to trial. In June 2000, Rebecca Cleland, along with Alvaro Quesada and José Quesada, were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury determined the crime involved special circumstances, financial gain, and lying in wait. Rebecca showed no remorse throughout the proceedings. In 2003, she received her sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Today, she remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Corona. Alvaro and Jose are also serving life sentences in California state prisons. For Bruce's parent, the verdict provided accountability but little comfort. From the start, they had sensed something was wrong. They had pleaded with their son not to marry Rebecca, worried she cared only for his money. In the months following the wedding, they watched helplessly as his once bright spirit dimmed. Bruce eventually confided that he planned to file for divorce, but by then, Rebecca's plan was already in motion. Bruce Cleland's life had always been defined by quiet, determination, and deep kindness. First in his studies, then in his career, and above all, in the love he showed to family and friends. His murder at the hands of the woman he trusted most left everyone who knew him devastated. As his father later remarked with sorrowful certainty, "She planned it from the beginning." The story of Bruce Cleland remains a haunting reminder of how trust can be betrayed, how greed can corrupt love into something deadly, and how one man's simple, dignified life was stolen by someone who saw him only as a means to an end. Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant before her son was born. Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his fourth. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m., On the night of Molly's death, he went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. Her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who were raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases. Near where the body was found, police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects, such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others, were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the 2 police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter, bloody and injured, near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Arliss Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. Diaz met Jared James Dekas while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angi was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angi is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angi longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angi and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angi's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angi's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angi after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angi hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angi and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angi, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's Meat Market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angi kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angi seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship. Jared's arrest for driving under the influence, just a month into their marriage, was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angi likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angi and Jared's marriage. While Angi had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angi's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances, while Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence. They reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angi later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angi seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angi's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angi and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angi, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angi's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angi lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angi's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angi's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angi. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angi's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession. admitting to murdering his wife, Angi. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angi in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angi. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angi had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angi had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angi's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angi's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angi's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angi. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angi's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angi's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angi's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angi's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angi. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angi's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angi's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Chaney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angi's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angi's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angi's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angi's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angi back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angi's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angi's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angi's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angi before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angi remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death at just 21 represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angi's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angi's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Kon, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward. hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding. Items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested, and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Kon, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, they married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a 3rd daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their third daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all 3 victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Shooter, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi-town court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their 3rd daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his 2 granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermedi emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's 2 daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. Nanette Krentle grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentle while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentle's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way. A mother of two disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon, Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the 6,000 British pound she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so they pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The records showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence, but by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before Katie went missing, she got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something: chilling sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick. Planning to return later, he also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on GPS data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just 1 or 2, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty, but just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed.